Hi folks, welcome to Finding Fuscata. I'm Sean. Normally I record up in my attic, but we're in a heat wave right now, and it is so insanely hot up there that I moved everything down to my basement, thinking it would be cooler, and it is a little bit, but then that creates other challenges, but it is what it is, and you just got to keep pressing forward. It's fine. You can't let those little things get in your way of your dreams, of your ambitions, of your goals. You just got to keep moving forward and adjust fire, as we always used to say. Listen, I want to do two things today. One is corrections. I'm going to make a correction because in that interview that came out with Regina Roberti, a couple things that were said were, never intentionally, but not quite accurate. So I got a little more information. I want to clear that up. And if you stick around, we're going to talk about the 5 things that your recruiter is not telling you about military service. And then if you stick around for the end, I'll give you a bonus 6th one at the end too. Okay? So here we go. Hey Sean, you messed that one up. You need to make a correction. Corrections. The correction has to do with the conversation I had with Regina Roberti a couple weeks ago. And in that conversation, Regina made a comparison between Chinese cultures and Japanese cultures. And I didn't say anything at the time, and she was in the middle of talking, and I thought about it, and I meant to make an editorial, but I didn't. I overlooked it. But a good friend of mine did catch it, and she called me out on it. So I thought it'd be worth talking about that. And also in that video, I said that I would talk about that later, and then I never did. And admittedly, when I looked into it, the information that I had gotten came from sort of I don't want to say right wing or left wing because I don't know, but it was more of a straight fear mongering news report about the dire conditions that are happening in Japan, and used all kinds of language like young people are murdering their parents, and it was totally meant to instill fear in people, the way that a lot of news channels are. And so that was my fault for not digging deeper into that and finding the truth about it. So my apologies on that. But this is what my friend pointed out to me. She said that, please note that not you actually, but Regina, that Japan doesn't have a policy of encouraging postmenopausal women to cross the veil. And that was what the discussion was about, is I had said that there had been some legislation that was proposed where they said that women who were postmenopausal or beyond birthing age just weren't contributing to society, and that they were being encouraged to self-euthanize, basically. And that's not the truth entirely. So what my friend continues to write is several Japanese politicians were criticized for making ageist and sexist comments. However, also, I would like to point out that Japan and China are two very different countries. They share some traditions. However, Japan has a primarily parliamentarian government, while China is a socialist republic. And absolutely fair point. And my friend, I believe, is from both Japanese and Chinese descent, so she would know way more than I would about any of that stuff. But what I wrote back is I did a little more research, and this was my response to her and trying to engage in this discussion. And I said, but there are stories from Japan of caregiver fatigue. So if you Google caregiver fatigue, you'll find out that, you find more about what's happening. But basically, as a lot of people in several countries around the world, in the developed world, as folks are getting older, people in younger generations, Gen X, boomers, they're just getting fatigued because having to work so many hours, working 2 or 3 jobs, and then you have an aging parent who also needs care, but then you can't maybe afford to put them into a home. And I guess in some cultures that's not acceptable to put them in a home. You should be caring for them as a family member. And then even in the U.S., I've known people who, when they put their parent into an elderly care home, that they basically just took all that person's accumulated wealth. They took whatever value was in their homes, whatever, retirement savings, whatever it was, and just took all of that, and there was just nothing left over after that. So it's a very broken system, for caring for the elderly. But specifically, let's go back to what's happening in Japan, where I wrote this. I said there are stories from Japan of caregiver fatigue. And there is proposed legislation to legalize euthanasia. And what I found is that wasn't specifically geared towards elderly women, as it had been shown in that one fear-mongering news report. It's just the idea of legalizing euthanasia. And the people that I found in the stories were folks that were suffering from long-term chronic conditions, or they, were nearing end of life from cancers, or, different things like this. And this has been a discussion in politics, from, I don't know if you remember Dr. Kevorkian back in the 80s and 90s, I guess, where, he was doing patient-assisted euthanasia, where, he would be there and be the caretaker while they took this concoction of medications and just, decided to exit life on their own terms. And it was highly, highly controversial. And there are places in the world where they're trying to legalize that. They're trying to have intelligent discussions about it. But the concern that's coming up is that as people are becoming more elderly and the birth rates are declining, now we're going to have these populations of elderly people, and there aren't going to be, the concern is there won't be enough people and resources to care for them. So anyway, here's what I found an article about it recently, but it appears to have been scrubbed from the internet. And what I meant by that comment is that that was the fear-mongering article that I had found. And so was it scrubbed, or can I just not find it? And I don't know, did it get lost in the Google rhythm? No idea. But I continue to try. In Japan, the medical care system is overwhelmed. People are living longer, but retiring earlier, and young people are having to work a lot of hours. It's something Japan is really wrestling with. And there appears to be a rise in eldercide. People are eliminating the elderly and infirm who they can't care for. And there are a number of stories that have come out about that. I don't know if that's the right term. I called it eldercide as I was writing that, but there are some disturbing stories that have come out about this, and because it's a real problem in the world, but particularly in Japan, and also in South Korea. South Korea is facing this too, which is tragic. And I continue to try. I don't think it's unique to Japan. Any country where the younger generations aren't wedding or having children and are terribly overworked is inevitably going to run into this problem. My guess is that South Korea will be next, if it hasn't started already. It won't be long after that when Belgium, UK, France, Canada, USA, and others face the same problems. All around the world, there are generations of people aging and failing faster than the system and the youth can fund. And if you've looked into anything about the birth rate collapse and population collapse, this is going to be a huge problem in much of the world. I was watching a YouTube video this morning. I'll try to remember to put the link in the description below, but it talks about this problem of population collapse and how over millennia, human populations have risen and fallen, and civilizations have had big booms and then collapses. It's happened many, many times, and we just may be facing another one right now, and that's just the reality of it. I heard a statistic that in South Korea, I think they said 100 years from now, they're going to have 4% of their population, their current population. So there'll be 4 people for every 100 people that there are now. And that's a tragic population collapse. My view, my concern, my hope, my contention, I don't know if that's the right word, but is that this will start to push forward some robotic technologies, some AI technologies to integrate some of those things, because we are going to have to care for these people. And we are going to have to care for ourselves. And I know that in Japan right now, there are hospitals that are staffed by care robots to, change sheets and bring food and, all these sorts of things that are automated. And that's what's happening, within the hospitals right now, which is a good thing, but then, could cause other problems. Like a friend of mine is in charge of logistics at his hospital, making sure rooms have beds and bringing wheelchairs places and, making sure food carts end up where they have to go and, getting people in all the right places because, you got a multi-story building with hundreds and hundreds of rooms and there's beds everywhere. Somebody has to be in charge of all the logistics of that, right? And you don't think about those logistical sorts of things that have to happen until you're in that care industry. And the solution that hospitals in Japan are coming up with is to automate a lot of those things, which means that there's another human job that isn't going to be there anymore. But if we have population collapse, then we aren't going to have to worry about the human job because there won't be a human to have the job, right? So everything's a double-edged sword. What are you going to do? Anyway, but my good friend replied to what I had said, is that, yes, this is a huge problem. All the first world countries are going to suffer from this issue sooner or later. I started to mention that video that I'll put a link in the description, but one of the things this YouTuber talked about is how population collapses tend to happen in urbanized areas. And areas that do not experience population collapse tended to be, there was two factors that they found in a study that they did, religious and rural. Religious and rural. So my thought is that, my takeaway from that is that, areas like New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and Baltimore and St. Louis and pick a city, right? Or pick any region of the United States that has, is densely populated. Those population centers are going to suffer the most. But, if you go to, the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee, for example, or if you go to rural Texas or Oklahoma or Missouri or, so much of the United States is rural. Those places won't experience the population collapse because people still regularly go to church and they are still regularly involved in their communities and they're a little more self-sustaining, but they have that network of people. I remember another video that I had seen where they were discussing population collapse and how there's all these doomsday preppers out there that have built bunkers in their basements and they're hoarding food and they're going to live off the grid and all this other kind of thing. And what they found there was that these people, they're doing what they can to live off the grid, which is fine, but their likelihood of survival is actually reduced because they don't have a community. Like when you run out of resources, then you run out of resources. Right? If somebody comes along and decides to take your land, it's just you. You can't band together with other people to defend what you have. So the greatest odds of survival are gonna end up being small town America in what they call now flyover country. That's what's gonna survive during this coming population collapse and all these catastrophes that everybody's talking about are on their way. Rural China. Rural South Korea. And South Korea doesn't have that much rural space anymore. Japan doesn't have as much rural space anymore. There's places where the whole country has great population density. I think those are the ones that are going to face the greatest consequences from population collapse. But anyway, but let me finish reading her response. So she recently did a translation project all about various solutions to solve the rapidly aging problem in Japan. One issue is that Japan is still so sexist that women are not gainfully employed for the most part. And that if women get a part-time job to help with the household finances, the husband gets taxed so much that in effect they lose money. What? I read that and I thought, that's bonkers. That's, wow. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that, but this is what I'm hearing. So you have to allow households to make a decent income and not penalize women for being gainfully employed. This is, my friend's opinion here. So, and this isn't, high power jobs. This is about average part-time retail jobs or, custodial jobs, things like that, these women are being able to take. But that's crazy that they would do that. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about the culture to know why somebody would have passed a law like that, but okay. But also, she mentioned that a Japanese politician, she believes it might have been the late Abe. He was the prime minister, I think. He was assassinated. Am I remembering that right? Oof. I wish it was like Jimmy Dore. I could reach over to like somebody and be like, "Is that right?" If anybody wants to audition to be like my young Jimmy, like, can you Google that for me real quick? That'd be cool. But I don't have it, so it's just little old me. Anyway, but I'm just reading this to share it with you. But somebody did make a statement that postmenopausal women should consider dying sooner because they're useless anyway, and they should just off themselves, or words to that effect. It's horrible, and there was a huge outcry, but that's been scrubbed from the internet as well. Interesting. That part of the conversation, the interview that I had with Regina, we were talking about how Don Lemon had made the comment about Nikki Haley, and when Nikki was announcing that she was running for president, and Don Lemon said that he made a comment that women hit their prime when they're 25 to 30 years old, and the ladies he was talking to were kind of aghast because it's not true, but that seems to be in many parts of the world. I think, and this is the thing I talked to Regina about, is that there seems to be a confusion between people reaching their reproductive prime versus people reaching their actual prime. And the case that Regina and I made was that women probably don't actually hit their prime until they're done with menopause and they're done with the childbearing years, and they've got grandchildren who have maybe even gotten a little bit older, like grandchildren that are out of diapers and in school now, so they don't always have to help with childcare and all this other kind of stuff. Like my mother-in-law watches my sister-in-law's little ones, just helps out while they were infants. She put in a lot of time doing that. But that phase is now ending, and she's going to have all this, mental energy that she can refocus on other things. And maybe this is the right time for the word contention, but my view is that that's when a woman can really fully come into her power, when all those other things are done, the silliness and the drama and the, worried about reproduction and worried about dating and worried about blah, 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 blah. And by that end, by that time, maybe they've accumulated some wealth and they've done some inner work and they've done some healing and they've done, like all those sorts of things have already been accomplished in their life. That person, that's going to be a force of nature. If that person's been allowed to be, freed from the rat race and achieve some financial freedom and achieve some spiritual, I don't want to say enlightenment, just like some spiritual maturity. And, is then empowered to act within the community, man, that's somebody in their prime. That's fantastic. Anyway, so that is that's my correction to the video, and I think that this is certainly a topic worth discussing. I think it's certainly a topic worth knowing about, particularly in nations where politicians and the politics of the country and the official media of the country tends to lean towards the left, tends to be, politically towards the left or more politically progressive. Because this, in my experience, the idea of euthanasia or, doctor-assisted euthanasia is something that, this doesn't come up in, let's say, red states, right? You don't hear people in Texas saying, oh, we want to have, like, doctor-assisted euthanasia. Like, that's not something that comes up. It's usually more in progressive countries because it's kind of a progressive idea to have people just like with absolute autonomy over their own life. And you know what? Maybe one of these days, When my platform is big enough, I'll interview, I don't know, Jordan Peterson or somebody who's way smarter than me on this and try to unpack that idea and see where that comes from. Like, why does that seem to be the thing? I don't know. Or maybe talk about it in the comments. Let me know. Or, even more fun, if you're interested, you can join us over on Skool.com. That's SKOOL.com/finding Fuscata. It's finding-Fuscata. And join in the conversation over there. We have great conversations about things. And I charge $1 a month for that right now while I'm building up the coaching program. And mostly that's to make sure that you're not a bot, and to make sure that, only people who want to do this are joining the community. It kind of keeps out some of the riffraff. So if that's something that would interest you, by all means, join the discussion, and be kind and polite. If you're a jerk, I'll block you and get rid of you. So it's super easy, right? Anyway, so on that note, so that's my correction. Corrections. Okay, now we're going to talk about the 5 things. You see this? The 5 things my recruiter never told me. And if you're thinking about joining the military, the 5 things that your recruiter probably isn't telling you. You got to remember that recruiters are there. They're there to make the numbers. They gotta hit their enlistment numbers and their commissioning numbers, but they gotta hit their enlisting numbers. Okay. And one of the things, this might have been like they aren't going to tell you everything. They're going to say, oh, military life is great. You get this pay and you can make this rank and you can, see the world and it's going to be cool. And my recruiter told me that his job, he was a F-16 crew chief, which is, the mechanic, and they would go out and they would, help launch the aircraft, and then there'd be like nothing to do while the aircraft was, flying their training missions. And he would just go over and, buy one of the generators and sit in the sun and take a nap. And I thought, man, that sounds amazing, but I didn't get all the rest of the information. So here's one of the first things that came to mind when I came up with this list is that it's important to stay in touch with family and friends. So a lot of people who join the military, they're doing that to get out of their hometown. They're looking for, career opportunities. They're looking to expand themselves. And one of the things that we always used to say when I was a younger airman, and I think it still happens now, is that, you go to basic training and you go through your technical training and you go home to visit for a little while and you see those friends from high school, or you see those friends that you knew, from before you joined, and they're still kind of doing the same thing. They're still the same people. And there's a part of you that gets this like kind of ego boost. You're like, wow, I'm doing something cool. I'm going to go, save America and the Constitution and, all that kind of cool stuff. And so be it. That's good. There's a time and a place for that. But what I've found, having come all the way to the other side of that, is that I wish I would have stayed in touch with some of those people. I wish that I would have remained friends with some of those guys, or made a priority to go home and just, kind of keep those roots with some of my childhood friends. Maybe that's not a thing for you. Maybe, you live in a toxic environment. Maybe, maybe you just have to get out of there. But if you're thinking about joining active duty, then there's an incredibly high chance that you will be stationed somewhere far, far away from wherever it is that you come from. My first duty station was in the UK. I came from a small town in New Hampshire and wanted to go do something different with my life. And when I signed up, they gave me a dream sheet. They said, hey, pick, what bases you want to go to. And I picked, a bunch of stuff on the East Coast so I could stay close to, the folks in the family. And I went immediately to England, just right to England. And after England, I went to California. And it was just like a whirlwind, tour around the world. And the time that I was gone, I lost connection with a lot of those people. But when it came time to get out, I found that I had not maintained those connections, which means that I didn't have any real roots. anywhere. I didn't have any real roots anywhere. And there's an old saying that you should grow wherever you're planted. And that's the idea that if you were born in New Hampshire, then you would probably be most successful in New Hampshire. It's wherever your roots are is where you're going to end up being most successful in life, because that's going to be your support system. That's going to be your support structure. And I didn't maintain that. And so I've been transplanted here to New Jersey, and it's taken me a bunch of years to be able to regrow new roots, and so now I'm starting to thrive where I was planted. Okay. But it would have been better for me if I had maintained those roots, maintained those connections throughout my career, and then I would have already had a roots established to go back home to and start growing. And I wouldn't have had this like lapse in time of, trying to figure out what I was going to do. Anyway, so the second thing, number 2, is separating from the military is a lot harder than anybody tells you. Particularly in my case, or if you're somebody who makes a career out of the military, you're going to do that for a long, long time, and that becomes your identity. I've known people who did one enlistment and then got right out, took their GI Bill, went to college, and then went and did cool things with their life. And I've known other people who did like a whole entire career like me. I did 23 years, 1 month, and 18 days. And the difference in you when you get out is you're not going to be prepared for the difference in who you've become. And I've seen this in career enlisted folks and commissioned folks, and the folks who just did one enlistment or just did their commitment to the military and then that was it. When they do go back home, or when they move back into the civilian world, it's more of a shock than you think it's going to be, because there's a big identity shift. And if you'd like to know more about the identity shift and how I transitioned from military to civilian, and the things that I learned about myself in going from being Sergeant Helgerson to just being regular Sean, and how I survived that transition without exiting myself stage left, like a lot of veterans do, sadly. Let me know in the comments and we can talk about that as well. But yeah, that's number 2. Separating can be a lot harder than you think it's going to be. And that doesn't, don't let that discourage you, because it's going to be, it's a growth process that you go through. And just like I said before, when you go back home and you see your other friends who haven't done much, and you try to reintegrate with that. So it's a fine-tuned dance that you have to do to be able to both maintain your roots and know how to reintegrate with that, but then keep the core skill sets that you've gained from the military. Anyway, we can talk about that more later. And so the number 3 is this. This was a really hard thing for me, is that time doesn't stop while you're away. And what I mean by that is I went for 3 or 4 year period. I think it was about 4 years when I didn't see my father in that time, because I had gone to, this is in the days before, video phones and, whatever, Zoom and links and videos and like all the kind of crazy stuff we have right now. But I had been stationed in Washington State, and my parents were still in Massachusetts, and I was over there, and I was busy, and I had kids, and I was working like long hours, and things were going kind of crazy. And then I went to Korea for a year. While I was gone in Korea, my parents came out and visited, my wife and kids, and but then went back home. And then when I got home, we went to Alaska, and again, it was a deployment after TDY after trip, and just all kinds of craziness happened for years and years and years. And when I finally left Alaska, it was me and my middle son. We drove all the way to the East Coast. I packed everybody else up on on a plane and shipped most of the stuff. But then my middle son and I actually drove the car back, and I stopped because by that time my parents had moved to Oregon, and I stopped in to see my folks, and that was the first time that I had seen my father in maybe been 4 or 5 years. And we'd spoken and we'd written and, emails back and forth. And I think maybe I had, seen some photographs here and there. But it was the first time I had like sat in a room with my father and like talked to him. And I remember being so shocked at how much he had aged in that time. Because if I remember right, that's when he had gone through, he was like in his, mid to late 50s. I think he crossed into, 60 or so. And he just like, boom, got old. And that was troubling to me. And I think that was when I started realizing I was already really well into my military career. I was way past 10 years. It would have made sense for me to get out because I had my golden handcuffs because I knew that I was, getting my pension and everything like that was coming up. But that was when I started seeing that, or started wishing that I had joined the National Guard or the reserves or done something like that instead of active duty, because active duty, you're going to be all over the world. Whereas with the Guard or reserves, you may deploy, you'll do different things and you get a lot of the same benefits, but you come back home afterwards. And that was when I started thinking that maybe that probably wouldn't have been a better idea. But, make your best choice for your own life. I'm just telling you the things that I experienced. Number 4 is alcohol is everywhere. It is ubiquitous. When I joined, I wasn't a big drinker. But by the time I got to my first duty station, man, alcohol was just everywhere. And even in places where every military installation that you go to is going to have what they call a Class 6. And it's basically a liquor store. That's where alcohol, beer, beer, wine, liquor, whatever it is, that's where they sell that stuff. And they make a ton of money off of that. There's an organization called AAFES. It's the Army and Air Force Exchange Service. And then they also, there's the Navy has one too. But no, that's the exchange. AAFES is, I forget what AAFES stands for. I'll have to look it up. But they sell alcohol to military folks, and they make a ton of money off of it. And it's just such a ubiquitous part of the culture. But the thing that's infuriating is that alcohol kills more airmen, soldiers, Marines, guardsmen than sailors, than anything else. There's more DUIs, alcohol-related incidents, sexual assaults. There's like that stuff happens so frequently, specifically because of alcohol. And I heard somebody say one time that if the enemy killed as many Marines as alcohol does, there'd be a war over it. But they just keep giving them alcohol. So if you have alcoholic tendencies, if your family has alcoholic tendencies, or if you're a drinker now and you're thinking about joining the military, then man, I would strongly advise against putting yourself into those kinds of environments. If you're strong enough or you're not worried about that right now, then hey, great. But know that is how things are going to be. And my hope is that sometime within the next few years is that alcohol will start to finally lose its popularity, finally lose its grip on our societies, and just kind of get, left in the past or moved into something like a cleaning fluid like it should be. We can like run our cars on it or whatever it is, but stop putting it inside our bodies and actively poisoning ourselves. So anyway, and number 5, this one's controversial, but I'll say it anyway, is that as you're going through your military career, my experience and what I've seen a lot of other people do, is that it's better to find a spouse from close to home or from someplace where you want to live. I can't tell you how many people, and this happened to me as well, how many people go into the military and you go to, like for us, I went to Lackland Air Force Base for basic training. And then after that, I went to Shepherd Air Force Base for my initial tech school training. And man, people were hooking up and they were getting married and they were getting engaged. And they're like, oh, I found the love of my life and blah, blah, blah. But, this guy's from Sheboygan and, that one's from, Ukabukistan. Like, I don't know where. They're from somewhere else in the world. And you can't, like, it's really hard when you have somebody who is from, Los Angeles, who, meets somebody in Texas who is from Portland, Maine. And, there may be chemistry, there may be great sex, there may be, a great friendship that grows. I made some tremendous friends from across the world and through my military career. I met some amazing people. But when I saw people who were married to somebody who was from a completely different part of the country, it seems great until you have kids, until the holidays roll around, until you're going on leave, you're taking some vacation, because then the contest becomes, well, last year we went to go see your folks at Christmas, and this year we got to go see, them, and now we're stationed in Japan, and everybody's so far away, and blah blah blah, and it's just it just gets so complicated. And I saw a number of marriages fall apart because of that, because they could never resolve that conflict of who was going to go where. The ones that I saw that did work out were, like in my case, I didn't have any interest in going back to New Hampshire. It's a nice place to visit for me. It's a beautiful place, but I didn't want to go back there. The winters are too much for me. And once I landed in New Jersey, I thought, okay, this is a place where I could live. And I met my wife. She's a Jersey girl. And I thought, okay, this is some place where I could go. And, we've been able to make it work. We've been able to build a solid marriage and a solid family. But so many people faced so many challenges when they had somebody who was just, from a different country, a different part of the world, a different side of the United States. Such a huge conflict. So, if you're looking at joining, definitely consider, and you're thinking about finding a spouse, you're thinking about finding a long-term partner, or, having a child with somebody, then that is something seriously to consider. So, to recap, here are the 5 things. Can I put them right there? All right. It's important to stay in touch with family and friends. Separating from the military can be a lot harder than you think. Time doesn't stop while you're away. Alcohol is everywhere. And if you're going to find a spouse, find one who is from close to home or from some place where you want to live. So those are my 5. Oh, and did I say I'd give a 6th? I think I said I'd give a 6th bonus one. So number 6 is, if you join the military, documentation in your medical records. Make sure. Don't do this thing where you're all wrapped up in your ego and you're like, oh, it's just my shoulder's a little bit stiff. I'm not going to go to the hospital. I'm not going to go get it checked out. Do not do that. Go. If you get the sniffles, go. If your shoulder's a little stiff, go. If your back hurts a little bit, go. If your hip bothers you a little bit, go. Doesn't matter. Any little tiny thing that seems so inconsequential, make yourself an appointment, get down to the medical clinic, get yourself looked at, get it documented in your records. Because right now, I'm having hip problems that are something that showed up when I was in the military. It showed up from running and doing a lot of exercises, but I never put it into my medical records. And so now, I can't have the VA look at it. And it's not too bad, but it's something that I can tell is like over the years, if I don't really baby it, it's gonna get worse. And I've known other people who have had serious mental health issues, and while they're on active duty, they never talk to anybody about their mental health. And now the VA won't do anything about it, or you got to open a case and argue it and make sure that they recognize it, as being military related. Because it's not, if you can't prove that it's military related, then it's not. They aren't gonna do anything about it. So get over yourself, go to the clinic, get yourself handled. So anyway, those are my 6. I hope this finds you well. I hope you're thriving. I hope you are flourishing. I hope that you are being kind to yourself, being kind to others. And I will not see you soon, but you'll see me. Thanks. Bye.